anthropologists, Phantom fans, but most importantly, there are pages and pages of the Phantom Shields. It's a terrific book. And here to talk about these shields is Chris Boylan, who has risked life and limb in the highlands of New Guinea to be with us today.
I'll just get this set up. Is it okay if I stand here?
Yeah.
All right, good. So I'm just going to show you a couple of Phantom shields to start, just to get an idea where we're going with the talk tonight. This is probably one of the earlier Phantom shields. You can see the Phantom character, but behind him is a traditional shield. So it's an old shield someone has taken and from old warfare and painted the Phantom shield over it. Okay. But if you can bear with me, I wanted to give a little bit of an introduction to New Guinea, the New Guinea Highlands, where these shields are produced, because it's from a very specific area of New Guinea, in the Wagi Valley area of the New Guinea Highlands. This is the Wagi Valley. It's probably one of the largest valleys in the New Guinea Highlands, and New Guinea was populated probably 60,000 years ago by migrations from Southeast Asia, and maybe 40,000 years ago people started to move up into the highlands and they populated these large valleys, and after that they were pretty well cut off from the rest of the world. Nobody else travelled up there. There was no contact down into the what was happening in the world outside, so the highland people for 30 to 40,000 years were pretty well isolated in these valleys. Oh, here's one example of a shield. Thanks.
He's having
Thanks,
so
Richard.
much fun he forgot that he bought it. Would it be safe there?
Yeah.
For sale?
Well, this one's actually in the a current exhibition at the Michael Reid Gallery, and I picked it up from them this morning, and just to bring it along tonight to show everyone. Now, so 30, 40,000 years ago, people moved up into the valleys, and basically they say a Stone Age culture until the 1930s, when some Australian explorers went up there. But in fact, even though they were Stone Age, it developed into quite a sophisticated culture, and perhaps 10,000 years ago, these big lakes in the highlands were actually being irrigated, and by 8,000 years ago, these irrigation ditches became quite sophisticated and complex. And keep in mind that the irrigation in the Middle East, in the Mesopotamia, in Egypt, happened 10,000 years ago. So similar things were happening in the highlands of New Guinea to what was happening in what we call the cradle of civilization. But because they were out of the ebb and flow of civilization, you know, they really didn't develop out of their Stone Age culture. But damn, sorry. And they developed quite a sophisticated culture, but also warfare. And warfare was from the first, when the Australians first arrived, they called it endemic in the highlands, and there were huge battles took place. And you can see this is a staged photograph taken in 1936, soon after whites first arrived in the highlands. You see very large shields and very abstract designs on the shields. And here again you can see the phantom painted, but the abstract design at the back. And when the Australians arrived, they basically stopped warfare in the Highlands. It was suppressed completely, and it wasn't really until after independence, the late 70s, late 80s, that warfare started to re-emerge. But what happened in the meantime, under Australian colonial times, the education began in the New Guinea Highlands, better healthcare, but also what arrived was the Phantom comics. And they first arrived in the New Guinea Highlands in the 1970s. And almost soon after that, it was serialized in the newspapers. So a lot of these young men, or young boys at the time, they would be learning English by reading the Phantom comics, by reading the newspapers. And it really became, an integral part of their culture. So, a generation later, when these young people who'd been brought up on the Phantom became warriors and warfare was re-establishing itself, they thought, well, God, we've got all our traditional designs fine, but now we speak other languages, we can write. So they began to put new images on their shields. And one thing they loved was the Phantom. So he became almost iconic on the Highland shields, and often they would write, like here, never die. Sometimes it'd be man who cannot die. Sometimes they'd write in Pidgin English, sometimes in English. Now, the connections, the Highland people, it was really quite incredible that, number one, they loved the Phantom because he was a man of very high moral caliber, and they saw that warriors in Papua New Guinea, if they're going to fight in a battle, they really had to have that very strong moral character before they went to war, and they appreciated this about the Phantom. Number two, the Phantom had his ancestors behind him, that being the man who never dies, I think, when did the Phantom comic, the character, I think, started back in the 15th century, would that be right? Or the 16th century, but he was ancient, and as he died, his son would take over in the same costume. So of course the people in Africa believed it was the same person that was there all the time, so the man who never died. And the fact that his ancestors behind him were there supporting the Phantom and in his good deeds, they have a very similar belief in their cosmology, that their ancestors continue to live in the mountains around them and can influence life in various ways, and they must respect their ancestors. Now the Phantom, this is one of the shields, and this is the artist, John Wagi, but you can see they have the skull cave. And this is another thing that the Highland people loved about the Phantom. He lived in the skull cave, high up in the mountains. And when the Highlanders believe when people die, they stay around the village for a certain number of years, probably until everyone they know in life is dead. Then gradually they drift up into the high mountains. So the Phantom was known to live in the skull cave, up where all the ancient ancestors lived. They loved this connection too. So on so many levels, the Phantom fitted neatly with their own cosmology. The first, you can see this is the post office in Bands, a small town in the Wagi Valley. And look what is painted on the post office. And this is the first recorded actual public painting of the Phantom. It was about 1985. And soon after this, he began to appear on shields. Now this character here, his name is Capel Carr. He died about 2007, 2008. But he maintains he was the first man to paint the Phantom on the shields. And what happened at this period, different paints were available, like enamel paints and acrylic paints, where before that the people would have used traditional ochre colours. And now that someone like Capel, he trained himself as a painter, an artist, and he used to do signs, and was basically a sign writer. And warriors now would come to him and say, please, Capel, paint something on my shield. What do you want me to paint? And often they'd say, I don't know, do something you want to do. And Capel, he loved the Phantom, and he loved the comics, and so he maintains, whether it's true or not, he was the first one to start painting the Phantom. And other people, of course, after that would start to copy him and the idea. Here's another one. You can see it's almost comic-like in its rendition on the shield. Black and white, the skull cave, the insignias, the chief, and atop the phantom. This shield's actually in the exhibition at Michael Reid Gallery at the moment. The phantom holding his pistols and sorry, we've missed a few images, not to worry. So here are warriors who are going to war, the phantom, and the reason they love to carry the phantom, he was the man who cannot die, ancestors behind him, so going into battle carrying the phantom is there's a figure with his deep spiritual background that's going to protect you in the fighting. And a big change happened though in the 1990s, going into 2000s, that guns were imported into warfare. And they started to be used in Highlands War. Initially shotguns, but later even more powerful guns. And at this point, of course, wooden shields became obsolete because the bullets, of course, would go right through them. And for a short period of time, the New Guinea Highlanders made shields out of metal. And they would use like the roof of a car. They didn't have much available, or they'd get a 44-gallon drum, a 200-litre drum, and flatten it out, roll it out, so you'd have a big sheet of metal this shape. And of course they'd paint the phantom on these metal sheets too, and for a while they say they protected them, that if you hold the shield, just as the gun fires, if you twist, the bullets will ricochet off. And I don't know if I really believe them, but because quite a few of these metal shields have got holes through them, so you just wonder. But so they used metal shields for a while. Timber shields were no longer being used for warfare, but these people like Capel Carr and the other guy we looked at, John Wagi, an artist, were starting to find that they were being considered artists. There were people coming to see them, particularly a man from the British Museum named Mike O'Hanlon. He was buying shields in the Highlands. People like me, who I'm an art dealer, we would come and buy shields. And so they had markets for these things over and beyond actually making them for warfare. So gradually what developed was almost an art market out of the New Guinea Highlands of people finding shields. Like this, for example, it's not an ancient shield. It was probably made in the 80s, 90s. And as well as painting for war, they'd also paint as an art piece that they say, someone's going to come and buy it. So, I mean, you could see some comparisons with even Aboriginal art that, here are dot paintings, that were originally body paint or paint for dance areas, transcribed to canvas, and it becomes an authentic art medium, and that's what started to happen in the Highlands. I would say by this time, very few, if any, shields are painted anymore. It's, the heyday was probably the 1990s, 2000s. By about 2015, I'd say almost none have been produced. I might finish there, and if anyone's got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Chris, you mentioned one of the artists wanted to come down.
Oh yeah, that was the fellow we saw standing beside his shield, and this is one of his paintings, his painted shields actually. His name's John Wagi, and I'm still in contact with him. He would have loved to have come, because we were at one point hoping to have an exhibition at the National Art School of the Phantom Shields, and it was planning to bring him down, but it just didn't happen because of COVID. It messed up lots of things, didn't it?
The next dinner, Richard.
When did you start your research?
Well, in some ways, I was very lucky. I've been going to Papua New Guinea for 40 years, since I was at school. And when war started again in the New Guinea Highlands, it actually became quite dangerous. There were groups called rascals, or basically criminals, but they would move around the roads, hold up vans, steal things. and it was quite dangerous to be in the Highlands. So very few, if any, art dealers ever travelled to the Highlands. But I knew a lot of people and always had groups travelling with me. So I was probably one of the few people in the period when these shields were being produced in the 1990s, early 2000s, that went to the Highlands. And even though at that point there really wasn't a market for them because people wanted traditional artifacts, masks and figures or traditional shields. So I tended just to accumulate them because I love them myself. And it's almost like now, 10 years, 15 years later, this finally is developing an appreciation. And a couple of years ago, I started working on the book because for me, it's always been a fascinating story how, a comic hero has come into, the tribal life and actually, been translated as an artwork onto their shields. So a couple of years ago, I started working on the book, and we did a lot of research on that, and probably found there's probably 150 to 200 shields out there. We managed to photograph 105 that are in the book.
I probably shouldn't ask this because it's a phantom dinner, but given that,
Go ahead.
Given that the phantom was the one that was introduced, were there other comic books that were introduced too and just didn't capture the imagination of the New Guinea people?
One thing about the Phantom, is he wasn't a superhero. He was a man, but a man of very high moral character. They loved that. He was a protector. He lived in the jungle. I guess that was part of the spirits behind him. So, and yeah, there were other superheroes, but to my knowledge, I've never seen a shield with Superman, Spider-Man, any of the other people. The only character they connected with, responded to, was the Phantom. Yes?
To buy one of those shields, are we talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands?
Thousands, I love that.
$20.
No, the shields at Michael Reid are generally between 4,000 to 10,000. Yeah, a lot of them are more like 7,000, 8,000. And that's actually quite a small one. Generally the shields from the Highlands are taller, almost human size, a little bit wider. Some are actually enormous.
Thank you.
Are they more valuable if they've been taken into battle?
I'd say no. Like a lot of art, I think it's probably more based on the artistic merit of the piece rather than whether it's been into battle or not. Yes?
You said they believe something about the Skull Cave. Did some actually find something about that? Like,
So-
go up where they believe the Skull Cave might have been?
Well, I've been up into the high mountains in the Highlands, and it's very interesting because they're also used as graveyards. So as you walk up, some of these paths, often in the side of the cliff, there are skulls. And I've never seen a skull cave, but I have seen caves that are quite small. I remember one very distinctly. You'd walk in, it was like human size, maybe a bit smaller than this room. In the middle was a stone, it was almost like an altar, but a natural part of the cave. And all the walls and the floor and this altar-like thing in the middle was covered in red ochre. So there was something very, like it was ceremonial, something very sacred about that cave. So they did have skull, what we might call skull caves, yeah.
I think that question from the youngest person here was probably the best question of the lot. And no offence to all you adults, but I can see that the staff are very nervous about dessert. I'm happy for you to keep asking questions, but you'll have to be happy that they'll start to give you dessert.
I just noticed on those shields there's no rings on any of the hands of the phantom.
There's no rings. Yeah. Well, maybe on this one, many of them they do have the ring. Yeah. So, and I did have some more photographs. For some reason they didn't come up, but often you get the ring. Sometimes around the Phantom you get the skull. And what's the one with the other one, the protector? Yeah, you have that, in big symbols. So, and this one is probably more realistic than most. But the rings definitely do appear.
The old Phantom comics, it's changed in modern time. It was very much white man was sort of like overseeing and protecting the jungle natives, and
Yeah.
not overly politically correct. Was that? I mean, that's very much the culture of the native people, the Highland stuff. Has that ever come into play when in your conversations that the Phantom, especially the older Phantom, he was a white man over domineering native people?
Yeah, yeah.
Has that ever been an issue, or?
I mean, if you look at the colonial history of Australia, being in there in Papua New Guinea, particularly in the Highlands, it was much later. I think the later colonial history happened, the better it was for the indigenous people, and I think the people in Papua New Guinea have a very positive view of how Australia governed the country when they were there, and I've been around the country, so many times. I've been held up with guns 3 times in my times there, mainly in the Highlands. But the people are so polite, there's a basic politeness towards the white man because we didn't do bad things. So the fact that the Phantom is white, I don't think is a big issue, but if anything, it might even be slightly positive.
And I think you mentioned in the book, or it might have been one of the contributors in the start of it, is a few people that submitted at the start of the book, but one of them mentions in there that one of the beliefs amongst the locals was that when the ancestors come back to visit, that they're white. And so when they saw Europeans for the first time, they thought they were their ancestors coming back.
Oh yeah, yep.
And do you think that plays into this on the back of next
No, that certainly could.
why the Phantom would be?
Yeah.
Because he's the ghost who walks, and he's the white ghost.
Yeah, it certainly could be. Yes, no, that's been documented that they did believe the white people were
Ghosts.
returned ancestors. Yeah.
Another very quick question. I was there I very briefly went to the gallery last night and saw them, and some of them are ginormous, like they're massive shields. Like,
Yes.
How do they physically carry some of these things? 'Cause
Well, there's that red one that's of this sort of size. Well, the Highlanders are small but nuggety people, big bodies, for their size, and one man would carry that shield, but there'd probably be 3 or 4 people behind that one big shield, with spears, with the bows and arrows.
protecting.
Yeah,
You ever watched
that's the
Olan
protection.
from the Storm tackle anyone, mate?
Oh,
But then, like a smaller shield like that, there might be the shield carrier and then one person, I think.
Do they produce their own Phantom stories and comics in Pidgin English?
Yeah, originally, yeah, the Phantom was published in Pidgin, and both in the newspaper and as comics, and I think it probably lasted a number of years, and by then, because the education system out there is in English, eventually, it just became more feasible to sell the English edition to Papua New Guinea. But initially, that's what happened, and I think that's why it was so useful, in those early days, for people to be able to read the Pidgin and start to learn to read and write. Okay, I think it might be dessert time. Thank you very much for your attention.
After dessert, we'll have the auction of some items. Renee White has opted to be a substitute auctioneer, and I have to warn you, please bid and keep bidding, because otherwise it's horrible.
You better hold it.
Yeah, this guy's gonna take a photo.
You hold it.
Even better.
Last chance to buy raffle tickets before the auction. I will have a lucky draw.
No problem. That was awesome, baby.
I have the raffle tickets here.
You want to take him out of me?
That's heavy too.
I know. What best?